Good evening, everyone. I am Terry Gilman, and I'm the owner of Creating Conversations, a bookstore and events business in Redondo Beach, California. I want to thank you for joining us tonight. We are very excited to have you here. So, to say that I am excited about tonight's event probably is a huge understatement. I think some of you in our audience have been listening to my raves about We Begin at the End for months. And now the book has been out for just a little over 2 weeks. And some of you have also been raving along with me, and thank you for sending me those comments. But it turns out we're not the only one that loves We Begin at the End. It was the the #1 Indie Next pick from all of the booksellers across the country for March. It was a People magazine book of the week. And it is now on the bestseller list, the New York Times bestseller list, for the second time, for the second week in a row and rising. So great things to come. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our guests. Amy Einhorn is with us, and I am so honored to have her here. Amy is the president and publisher of Henry Holt & Company and has held a number of prestigious positions at different New York publishing houses over the last 30 years. Many of her fiction and nonfiction titles have appeared on bestseller lists and have made it to the screens, both big and small. Of particular note, Leanne Moriarty, told you I was going to mess that up, 9 Perfect Strangers is going to be a Hulu original series with Nicole Kidman and Melissa McCarthy later this year. In addition to her publishing responsibilities, Amy has been juggling her 3 kids and their schooling demands, as have many of us. I asked her for a fun fact, and she told me that her first salary in publishing was so small that she had to clean houses to make ends meet. That is no longer true, and it might be a lesson for some of us. Chris Whitaker is my new favorite author. He lives in the United Kingdom. He has 3 young children, ages 10, 8, and 8 months. He has written 2 other books called Tall Oaks and All the Wicked Girls. And we are all hoping that they make it to the US soon. They are not available to us at this moment. But you will hear from me when that happens. When he is not writing, he works part-time at a local library so he can surround himself with books, something I understand completely. Chris is speaking to us tonight from the UK, where it is 1 a.m., but he told me he does not mind the late hour because it gives him a little peace and tranquility away from his domestic duties. And his fun fact is that he built his office single-handedly by watching YouTube videos over a month ago, and he's in that office now. Amy, Chris, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Can everyone hear me? Okay, so first I'll just start off by saying I hope you all know how fortunate you are and lucky to have Terry, because I've known Terry, I don't know, Terry, how long we've known each other, but for a long time at this point. And Chris, I haven't told you this, but I'll routinely send Terry books and I'll be like, I'm so excited, I love this book and you should have this author. And she'll be like, yeah, I didn't like it that much. So she's quite a good gatekeeper for all of you. But in all seriousness, it's really nice to have a bookseller who you can trust, because in New York, we just sort of have these sort of like, no one knows who you are and just sort of faceless. So thank you, Terry, and thank you for having us. Chris, it was funny because at one point when Terry was just giving instructions, he said, raise your hand, which for those of you who have read the novel or started the novel actually starts with this raising your hand, which is, so do you want to sort of, for those people who haven't read the book, and I'm actually curious because this is great for me because I get to ask Chris whatever I want. How do you describe what the book is?
That is, this is like me having to pitch to my boss, so it's really difficult. Right, so We Begin at the End. It's a story that follows a year in the life of a 13-year-old girl named Duchess and a police chief named Walker. They sound like they don't have an awful lot in common, but they're both kind of struggling. They're very much alone, and they're both kind of living in the shadow of this thing, this terrible thing that happened 30 years ago, so long before Duchess was born. The book begins with the town, this small town called Cape Haven in Northern California, with the residents there looking for a missing child. And they're kind of all sweeping through the town in a line. And the police chief says, if you see anything, raise your hand. And Walk raises his hand because he finds the girl's body. And the person responsible for that is his best friend, Vincent. That's not a spoiler, that's how the book begins. And then we skip ahead 30 years and kind of catch up with them. And Vincent's about to come home after 30 years in prison. And Duchess is scared of him coming back because she knows that he used to have a relationship with her mother, and Duchess's mother is a bit of a mess. So she's kind of single-handedly keeping her small family together and looking after her younger brother. So yeah, so that's where we are. And then Duchess does this terrible thing. You know, she's trying to keep them safe, and she sets forth this chain of events that shape the next year in her life. That's
so can you tell me, I'm always sort of fascinated because I work with, obviously, this is what I do for a living. I work with authors, and authors just have such drastic ways they do things that are differently. I have some authors who have every single thing plotted out. They know exactly what's going to happen at the end from the beginning. I have others who will say, I had no idea this was going to happen. This is what just the characters, this is where they took me. And I'm just sort of so curious, like how, for instance, you know, did you start with the scene of them walking in the field? I mean, where does and do you actually have it sort of plotted out, or is everything a surprise to you?
No, it's I'm terrible at that side of it. You know, I've got I think if you do some courses like creative writing courses, things like that, they help you with that side of it. Because I've got some author friends that have done it, and they're very good at the plotting, and they kind of know exactly what they're going to do on what day and which scene is going together. And I kind of know how it's going to end, and that's about it. So I knew how this story was going to end, but how I got from the beginning to the end was a bit of a mess, and that's why it took so long. And that's probably why you had your work cut out when you were editing it. So no, I don't write the first scene first. You know, I think there's a lot of pressure on getting that right. You know, it's you want to hook people, and people, I think Stephen King talks about it, you know, you get that first sentence to grab people and pull them in, and I just left it for ages. So I just sit down and write whichever scene I feel like writing on that day, you know, whichever. If I'm in the mood to write something funny, then I'll write something funny, and then I slowly cobble it together, and then over years probably I read it and rewrite and go through it and probably write the book 3 or 4 times over, and then I deliver a bit of a mess to you, and then you fix it and make it a book. And that's how we got this lovely book behind me.
So I'm glad you actually brought up the humor, because there actually is a lot of humor in the book, which I think, you know, if you just did a description of the book, which is, you know, you start off with he finds the body of this girl, and but it's quite funny. I mean, not laugh out loud funny, but there's humor. So were you intentional in that, or does that sort of come out? Usually it's actually the humors from Duchess, who has a very, very sort of dark sense of humor. Are you aware when you're writing it, or do you look back on it and think, oh, that was funny?
I'm kind of aware that I don't, you know, if I'm writing a year in the life of someone, which this is just having a look, it's a snapshot of Duchess's life, then we're going to see, you know, if we're seeing the bad parts, then we're going to see the good parts, and no one is serious all the time. And, you know, she goes through a lot of stuff, but she's still only 13. And it was really important to me to include those scenes, because I think she can be quite tough and abrasive, and, you know, she swears a lot, curses a lot in the book, and she can be quite hard to love. But we also get these glimpses of, you know, the child that she still is, and the life that she might have had she had a normal childhood, had she not been forced to be a carer. And it's those bits are important. I think they're important, you know, for you to be able to empathise with her. And I think some of the humour comes out when she's she has a suitor in the book called Thomas Noble. She moves to Montana, and this this poor boy couldn't choose a worse person to kind of to set his sights on. And so he picks Duchess and wants to take her to her first school dance. And she's really mean to him. And I think she kind of does it tongue in cheek, you know, just to keep him away. And it sounds quite savage, but that's probably where a lot of the laughs come from. So, yeah, no, it was important to me.
Did you spend any time with 13-year-olds? And I'm asking specifically because now my 15-year-old daughter read it when she was 14. And the one thing, I mean, there's so many things about the book that I love, but I will say I do think that a lot of times people in adult novels, they sort of infantilize kids and they don't sort of get them, like, you know, like Duchess is really tough, but my now 15-year-old, like, I wouldn't, you know, I wish that, you know, she's tough. Like some of these kids can be really tough and sardonic and all that. And I'm just curious, like, did you have to remind yourself what it was like to be 13?
Well, when I first started writing Duchess, I was a teenager, so I wasn't all that far away from her. But I have cousins around that age, female cousins that you know, I spend a lot of time with, and I read a lot of YA, and I did a lot of research. You know, you can just watch videos and read transcripts and things like that of kids that have been through something similar to Duchess, and you kind of can build a picture. But yeah, I was aware that it was a really important thing to get right, because I'm hanging an adult story on the shoulders of a 13-year-old girl. And if I don't get that right, then the book, you know, it's just not going to read right. You know, it's not going to feel authentic. So of the many years it took to write, Duchess was responsible for probably 80% of that time. You know, I just probably spent a solid year just writing and rewriting her dialogue till it felt right, till I knew how she'd react in any given situation, and just that she felt right, really. Yeah. I guess it comes from reading and watching TV, and, you know, and talking to people, and just what feels right. I'm a strong believer in gut feeling, and, you know, if I'm writing something and I'm not enjoying it and I end up deleting it, it's because, you know, I've got something wrong, something fundamentally wrong. But with Duchess, by the end of it, by the time the book got to you, I had a good sense of who she was.
So let's take a step back, because, you know, obviously I know you, and I, you know, when I got the book, I knew it was coming from the UK. I think some of the people on here might be surprised if they didn't read the author bio, that not only is this book that's partly about a 13-year-old girl who lives in Northern California, is written by a man, but written by a man who lives in the UK, who's British, and if I'm not mistaken, has never actually stepped foot in California. So I think the question a lot of people would probably want to know, which is like, how did that come to be?
So how did I come to write the story?
How did you come to write the story? Yeah, I mean, just tell us. I would love to know, how did you come to write this particular story?
Yeah.
And then also, if the second question would be, how did you come to be a writer?
Okay, so the two are very much linked. So we have to go back to, as I said before, to when I was 19, and when I first wrote Duchess, I messed up at school and bounced from job to job and didn't really know. I had no direction, my parents would say. You know, I had an overachieving brother who went to the London School of Economics, and I was very much, you know, I didn't know what to do, didn't know what I was doing with my life. So I bounced from job to job, worked in bars, things like that, and I was out dropping leaflets through people's doors. I was working as a real estate agent, and got mugged. Someone came up to me, and we kind of had a fight, because I was 19 and a bit fearless, you know, like you are at 19. And he pulled out a knife and stabbed me a few times in the side. And I didn't realize I'd been stabbed, because, you know, the adrenaline's kind of going. And I thought I was just being punched, until I looked down and saw blood everywhere. And then he dropped the knife, and I dropped my phone and wallet, and he ran off, and I drove myself to the hospital, and they stitched me back together again. And, you know, so on the surface, I just had a few scars, and people kept telling me how lucky I was. And I remember feeling really unlucky. You know, I did not feel lucky at all. But the consensus amongst my friends was just, you should just get on with it, slap on the back, you did something brave, which I didn't see as brave. I just felt horrible afterwards. I didn't know about PTSD, and didn't feel able to talk to anyone about it, because I wanted my parents to think that I was okay. I didn't want to be the son that they worried about all the time. And I started drinking, taking drugs, things like that, and then began to hoard painkillers, which sounds extreme, but this probably went on for a year. I was in a really bad way. And then I sat down and I was going to write a note to them, just to apologize, kind of. And I wrote, and I remembered reading a book that I got from the library, a self-help book, and it talked about a therapy where you write about the thing that happened to you, the terrible traumatic incident, and you change the people involved, change the outcome, change the location. And I think it's a kind of distraction therapy, looking back on it. But I sat down and I wrote Duchess. I wrote this, as strange as it sounds. She kind of appeared on the page fully formed. And that got me through that night. And I went to bed and went to sleep and slept for the first time in months and months, because I had just stopped sleeping, stopped eating, stopped doing everything, that I needed to do just to stay sane. And then I carried on writing her, so the next night I wrote a bit more. It wasn't a story, they were just kind of disjointed scenes, but the more I wrote, the better I felt. And then I moved on and went to, I had a difficult time. I drove my car off the road. I was drunk at the time, and my mum was really disappointed because I was in hospital again. I've got a scar down my cheek, which you can't really see thanks to the lighting in here, but it reminds me of that time. Every time I shave or something in the morning, I'm reminded of what happened, and I still didn't tell anyone. And then I read an article about a stockbroker in the newspaper, and he had a Ferrari, and I thought, I'm going to be a stockbroker. This is the life for me. This is, yeah. And which is ridiculous, because I'm bad at maths and I messed up at school, which my brother reminded me of. And so I went into the city, got a job, worked very hard, and worked my way onto a trading desk. And my boss said to me, just before my first day on the trading desk, he said to me, if you lose $20,000, you stop trading. So I came in the next morning and lost $2 million. And then I was in real trouble again, because I had a friend that worked in the back office. So I said to him, let's keep it quiet. I'll pay it back, which is ludicrous, because I was, in massive amounts of trouble. And I came in one morning and everyone was waiting for me in the boardroom, the bosses and lawyers and people like that. And I'd been caught, obviously. So they said to me, we can either go to the police or you can pay back half of it. Because I'd started to make money at that point. So I signed a contract there and then, and remember clearly, I was 24 and I was on the train back home in London, and I was in $1 million of debt, and I didn't tell anyone, and I was engaged to my wife, and the wedding costs were kind of spiraling, because everyone thought I was doing really well, and I was just in real trouble. And I went back, I was exactly all the way back again, all the hard work I had done. I was back there, drinking too much, taking drugs, didn't know how to get through it, didn't want to ask for help. So I went back to Duchess again, to this story that I was writing in Montana. So even on our honeymoon, I kind of set up after my wife went to bed and would write bits and pieces of this scene. And then, this is a really long answer, isn't it, to a really simple question. So I'm going to speed it up a bit. So then I paid it off, worked really hard for years, but was not happy in the city. I read a book called The Last Child by John Hart, and then an interview with John Hart where he talked about quitting he was a lawyer, a successful lawyer, and he quit his job to write his debut, to make himself happy and to do something that he loved. And the next day I went in and did the exact same thing. My wife was pregnant at the time and a student, and didn't know that I'd wanted to be a writer or anything like that. So I just came home and said, I'm going to write a book. I've quit my job. and we had a difficult discussion that evening. And but she was, you know, super supportive and still is, and knew that I hadn't been happy. So we sold our house car, moved away, moved to Spain for a while because it was cheaper. We wanted to live in the sunshine for a while, and I wrote Tall Oaks, and that pretty much brings us up to date.
So, but okay, so for people who don't know, so you had 2 books that were already published, only one in the US, correct? And that was by a really small publisher. And I think when we looked up the sales history of the last book, it sold, I think, 400 copies.
Wow, did it do 400 copies? That's better than I thought.
And then for everyone else, I'm going to brag because Chris won't, which is, so this Sunday on the New York Times bestseller list, the book will debut on the New York Times list at number 14. And then we in publishing get the list a week and a half ahead of time. So then the following week, it's moved up to number 11, which is really, I'm sorry, number 9, which is actually kind of incredible.
Number 9, we're top 10.
You're top 10, baby. I am curious in terms of what has been your experience being published in the and it's hard, obviously, because you haven't been able to come over here. And I should say, Chris was all set up until I think like 2 weeks ago. He said, I have my plane tickets. I'm coming to the States. And everyone's looking at me and they're like, I'm like, I know I have to tell him he can't come. And I had to call Chris up. And I think I just said, like, listen, you're in very good company, because I also had to tell Hilary Mantel that she couldn't come over on a tour either, because she was all set to come over at the beginning of the pandemic and said she would only not come unless she was turned away at the border. But what has your experience been in terms of the difference between being published in the UK and the US?
So I'm going to go and talk about the difference between We Begin at the End and the other books, because Tall Oaks doesn't really count, because I think the publisher has now gone bankrupt, and, you know, I didn't ever hear anything from them. But it's very different, you know, it's incomparable. Just to be part of something like We Begin at the End, you know, we've kind of, I think the book arrived on your desk a couple of years ago now. So yeah, 2 years ago. So we've been we've been in constant contact for 2 years, you know, building up to this, and it's been epic, you know, the level of work involved and the talent of the people involved, and it's like nothing I've experienced before. It's been you know, really, really special. You know, just getting to set up and do things like this is very cool. And but, you know, I've enjoyed every part of it, and I don't expect to be here, you know. And it's so sometimes people will ask me what it's like, you know, to be in the New York Times and things like that, and it's beyond my wildest dreams, you know. Just to have people read the book is strange, because my days are spent in the library, and I'm shelving the author's books that are now reading my book and quoting for it and things like that, and it's very surreal. You know, like we got Kristen Hanna the other day, and I got an email from her, and it's just like, this doesn't happen. It's so odd. And I was working that day, and I was shelving Kristen Hanna books in the library, and then her email popped up on my phone. So yeah, to answer your question, it's different and amazing.
So I want all of you to remember this, so that the next time Chris's book comes out and he's like too big to talk to any of us because his head can't fit on the screen, that we can remember this. I am curious, Chris, and I've never asked you this, but I am now, just like as a fan, and I don't know if you had a thought about this, but if you could now, like, what do you hope that people get from, like, when they get to the end of the book? Like, is there either an experience or something that you hope that people sort of glean from the book?
So I've had loads of messages, actually, from people. A lot of people relate to Duchess in some way, which is lovely, or are deeply affected by her story, which is also lovely. And also, you know, there's a pandemic on, but we're all so used to it now, we kind of forget, because it's like the new normal. But people have been able to escape into the story, which I think is lovely. But I think just to be entertained, you know, because it's intensely personal to me, the book, you know, because it's been pretty much 20 years in the making. But on the surface, you know, it's entertaining. It's commercial fiction, and we had discussions about where it fits, didn't we? Many discussions about what genre it is and things like that. But I just want people to enjoy it. That's the best I can ever hope for. You know, I didn't ever expect this particular book to be published. I didn't think I'd finish writing it, and I didn't think I'd share it. And so to have it out there and to have lots of people reading it and reviewing it and seeming to like it, it is more than enough.
Okay, well, since we're doing an event in California and you were just talking about entertaining, I think it's fitting. So it was just announced that the book was sold for film. So A, can you tell us a little bit about who bought it? And B, the question everyone would like to know is who if you could cast the film, who would you cast?
Okay, so I had this mad week, couple of weeks, where I was working at the library in the day and then having Zoom meetings with Hollywood studios in the evening, which was really, it's not my life at all. You know, it was another surreal moment. So I had a choice. I was very lucky, and I emailed Amy about it at the time, and we talked things over, and I did with my agency. But I knew straight away that I wanted Disney, not just because it was Disney, but because so one of the producers who will produce the TV show is the director of Hamilton, and I'm such a big fan of Hamilton. It's Tommy Cale, and I just thought it was a masterpiece. You know, I just thought it was so clever and brilliantly done, and they really got the book. You know, and they got the characters, and they just, yeah, it just felt right. It's that gut feeling thing again, and yeah, so Disney have the rights, and they're looking for a writer at the moment. I got an email from them today about it, actually, because they keep telling me to send them a list of TV shows that I like, and then they'll approach the writers. But I can't bring myself to do it because it seems too, you know, out there. It seems too far-fetched for me to just pluck an author, pluck a writer that I like, you know, from a TV show. But I'm going to do it. I'm going to, you know, really go for it. I'm going to pick like the best shows that I've ever seen, like True Detective and things like that, and see what they say. As for the who would play the characters, I find that difficult, that one. But people like to send me their ideas for the characters. So David Harbour, who plays the policeman in Stranger Things, his name's come up more than any others to play Walk. Who else? We had Jake Gyllenhaal for Walk as well, which some people really liked. I can't see them as anything other than my characters that I've created. You know, they don't, to put someone in there kind of messes with my mind a bit. But yeah, I don't know. Who do you think? You know the book as well as I do.
Well, I think I'm probably the last person on the planet. My 15-year-old daughter and I just finished watching Stranger Things, which everyone in my family can't understand because I've never watched anything that is horror or scary in my entire life. And I don't know what that says about sort of me right now or the pandemic, but I was obsessed with it and loved it because it was sort of like, oh, well, there's a pandemic. And every time I open the New York Times, it says my risk of getting COVID from living in New York City is extremely high, but at least I'm not being eaten by monsters. Like the end. So like, I loved it. And I think he would be fantastic because I have a huge crush on him. And I think he's kind of how I'm envisioning. And I have to say, I have a crush on Walk. I mean, it's interesting because obviously I'm in love with Duchess, but Walk to me is such a tragic figure. I mean, they're all kind of tragic in their own way, right? I mean, it's just sort of like they're all tragic, but yet there's this sort of hopefulness. And that's what I think is such an amazing thing about the book is that there's so much nuance in it.
Yeah, I think that's where you know, that's what I wanted in the characters. You know, there's a lot of kind of people trying to get past the past, you know, past mistakes and things like that, and it's something I can relate to. And it's kind of why I wrote them in that way. And I think about it a lot, you know, I think about sliding doors moments in my life. And I think about if I hadn't walked down that particular street in London on that day, you know, would I be here now? Would I have written this book? Probably not. But would I be any happier and would I be the same person? Probably not again. And I think it's just learning to accept, you know, your flaws and the bad things that you've done or have been done to you. You know, it's about finding a way to live with them, and all of the characters in the book have kind of got something in their past that they're struggling with. But then I think most of us have, don't you think? You know, you know, everyone's got some things that they would do differently, but that might change who they are now. So, you know, it was just about looking at that, and it was about self-sacrifice, and one of the few things that Duchess's mother teaches her at the start is that selfless acts make you a selfless act makes you a good person, and she kind of clings to that and spends the book looking for her selfless act. And yeah, and I can relate, and I feel a bit like that sometimes, and I feel like I'm always looking for something, you know, a way to be a good parent or something like that. And I think about these things that I talk about now, like, you know, taking drugs and stuff like that, which isn't a big deal anymore, you know, that the stigma is kind of gone. But my dad only found out about that by reading a version of this story that I've just told you in The Guardian, which was not a good way for, you know, I just didn't feel able to talk to him. So he phoned me up and he said, you know, is this true? And I said, yes. And I think he was, you know, the way I see it, he was a bit disappointed in me. And I don't want my kids to feel like that. You know,
disappointed that you hadn't told him, or disappointed that disappointed how?
Both. I think both. I think disappointed that I had not told him at the time, you know, and disappointed that I had gone down that road, and I worry that my kids, because stuff stays on the internet now forever, doesn't it? It's you know, if my kids Google me one day, you know, I'll be long forgotten by then. I'm sure you'll have dropped me and no one will know who I am. But if they do want, you know, they're going to find out stuff about me that I'm hoping I'll talk to them about, because they see the scars that I've still got scars on my side, and I make up stories like I got bitten by a shark and things like that, and, you know, funny things. But Charlie, my eldest, is 10 now, and, you know, I think he's going to find out at some point. And I don't know, we all want to be perfect for our kids, don't we? Or not quite perfect, but just not flawed, not so flawed. And I feel quite flawed.
Yeah, but don't you think, I just think it's incredibly brave, first of all, that you're being so public with it. And, you know, my husband has this, he's quoting someone very famous, so I'm of course quoting him, but, you know, it's not sort of how, it's sort of how you get up from your failures. And so I think all of that, I mean, the fact that you were able to take this traumatic event and turn it into something positive, I think it's actually so much better than presenting to them perfection, because no one actually, I mean, in a way, what the book is showing, right, is,
yeah,
you know, no one has perfection. And Duchess, who sort of has this tough exterior, what you find out is she's actually this, like, you know, this little girl who just wants to buy that Stetson in the store, right?
She is, yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, she's it's a front, isn't it? She's good at fronting, and I spent much of my life fronting, and, you know, kind of putting on this brave face to everyone, and it probably wasn't the right thing to do. Yeah, and that's kind of all she's got, though. So she doesn't know who her father is, and a school project she gets to go and research her family tree, and like her father's side's just blank, and on her mother's side she finds a link to an outlaw, and she kind of clings to that, you know, that gives her a route, and so she declares herself an outlaw much of the time when she needs to excuse her bad behavior, or when she needs to be strong, or when she's about to do something bad, she'll say to her brother, you know, we're outlaws. And yeah, she needs that front.
Oh, I do want to ask you who would play, because I forgot my other character I was in love with is actually her grandfather, who I absolutely adore. So
I know, I remember. So when you were editing, and I've had quite a few editors, you know, most, for some reason, after I work with an editor, they leave and go to another company in the UK. Like my fourth editor or something. But when you were editing, there's a scene where Duchess gets drunk. She's at the farm with Hal. She goes to live with her grandfather, and then Hal picks her up, and he kisses her head, and she whispers, "I hate you." And you wrote something in the margin, you know, about, and it was a really nice thing, because sometimes when you spend a long time writing a book and then it gets edited, the edits can read like a long list of things, you know, that you could have done better or that should be changed. And I'm not precious about it at all, but there was just, you know, you put nice comments in the margin, and I always wanted to thank you for it, because it's so lovely. It is really.
I think actually now you're saying that scene, it's so funny because I haven't read the book in a while. I think what I said is I cry every single time I read the scene.
Yeah, and I thought, it must be, you know, it must be okay then, that scene, you know, we must have got it close to right if it makes you feel something. But as for who would play how, I think you would be better at this than I am, because I'm dreadful. I don't know. There's probably a fair few actors, you know, that could do it well.
I feel like when everyone asks their questions from the audience, everyone could suggest people and we could keep a list.
Yeah, and then we can take them to Disney and we can say, this is what the people want. You know, give them what they want.
I thought you for a second, I was like, you could take them to Disneyland. And I'm like, we're all going to go to Disneyland together.
I want to go to Disneyland, and I did ask them for Disney tickets, but I think they thought I was joking.
Well, actually, that's a lot. And this is a good segue, which you didn't answer, but I know the answer, but the audience won't, which is why did you set the book in California and you've never been?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So this will explain. So California, partly because I wanted to build this town that was perfect 30 years ago. And, you know, Walker's trying to preserve it because that's when he was happiest 30 years ago, before everything went wrong. But Montana, when I was a kid, my parents split up quite young and I didn't see my dad that much and I really missed him. And he took me and my brother to Disney in America. And we were standing in line to go on one of the rides. And there was a family in front of us from Montana. And they were telling us, you know, about how beautiful Montana is. And they just painted this portrait of it. It's just like, it was like a utopia. And I thought, this place must be amazing. And the man said, the dad said, it's like switching from portrait to landscape. And it stuck in my head all these years. And it's a line that ends up in the book. And Montana became my place to go to because it was a happy memory from before. And I saw the before me that got stabbed, you know, as much happier. So that's why I set it in Montana. And I looked forward to it, you know, going there after a hard day at work or when everything was going wrong in my life. You know, I got to sit down and escape to Montana in the evening, and it was needed.
So I could keep asking questions, but Terry, I think I was supposed to only ask questions for 30 minutes and I've already gone on for 40. So do you want me to keep going or do you want to open it up to the audience?
What could we talk first before we open up to the audience about his writing style, which is for me
Yes.
very distinct, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Okay, so I will ask. So Chris, and it was funny because I remember when I got the manuscript. So I got, you know, we would get it called. It was sent to me on submission, and I was reading it. And you know, for those of you who have read it or are reading it, it's a very particular kind of cadence. And actually, you know, Chris, we even went back and I think I made you change some of it at the very beginning because I didn't want it to be off-putting to readers because it kind of, once you get in the rhythm of it. So I was just curious, and I think Terry is as well. Was that a very self-aware decision on your part, or is this just sort of how you write, or how is it that, like, do you notice that you have it even?
It's funny because it's quite different from the other two books. And when I decided to focus on this book and, you know, decided to try and finish it, this story that began 20 years ago, I went back and I had all these bits of writing and they were written like that, you know, fairly short and sharp. And I distinctly remember sitting down and trying to get this out, and I don't know how to write and I didn't know what I was doing, and I wasn't, you know, and it felt right to carry it on, you know, to keep writing like that. And it's not all like that, you know. You get some scenes where Walker's driving and, you know, you get a strong feeling of where you are and it's very descriptive. But the tougher scenes are very kind of unemotional, you know, they're just presented. And yeah, it was a continuance of how I'd written at that time. And I tried changing it and it didn't feel like the same story and it didn't feel right and it didn't feel like Duchess's story anymore. And I stuck with it, and I'm really glad I did, because I love the way it reads, you know, to read it back. And a few people have said, you know, it takes a couple of pages to get into it and get used to it, but then you don't notice it so much. And I don't notice it at all now. But so it was just, something I became less aware of, you know, because it was probably 3 years solid writing it after I decided to continue with it. And it just became the way I write.
And so do you write it, do you think that was specific to this book? So when I get the next book, when I'd love to know, you when ask when that is, but will it have that same kind of style, or was that specific because in a way the POV of the characters were having to, they had to sort of distance themselves so much, so it was sort of this kind of like, you know, staccato?
Yeah, I think it's unique to this book, but I think it's ingrained in me to write like that now. I think it will be fairly similar. Well, I know it will because I've started writing it, so it will be, you'll know it's my writing, basically. It won't be exactly the same, but similar.
Okay.
It was certainly one of the things I loved about the book. So we all look forward to the next one.
Thank you.
Let's go ahead and open it up for questions. So again, if you are interested in asking a question, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there's a reactions button. And if you click the reactions button, you will see an opportunity to raise your hand. So I'm gonna open it up for a moment, and then I may fill in with questions of my own. So Tam, are you gonna monitor this? I think they rise to the top. Here we go. Lois Swaggerty has got a question. Go ahead, Lois. You'll have to unmute yourself before you ask your question.
Got it. Thank you. Just could you comment on the title of the book?
Yes. Hi, Lois. So I don't name the books normally because the first two books I spent ages thinking of titles, and then the sales department just changed them. So I thought this book, I'm gonna because there's a bit at the beginning of the book. It's almost like a prologue. You know, I described it before, where the town are searching for this girl. And I called that part "We Begin at the End" because it felt like that was the end of the story for so many of the characters. You know, it was an event that they couldn't move past. And then it's mentioned later in the book when Hal, you know, who's the father of the girl that dies at the beginning and Duchess's grandfather, the priest tells him "We begin at the end" in the hope that it will make him feel better, like his daughter has gone on and is living a life, you know, in the afterlife. And then it just felt right, you know, it just felt so perfect for this book. It felt like Duchess was, you know, written off before she was even born. You know, she had no real chance because she was being born into this environment into this town where this shadow is just looming and just stuck there, and none of them can get away from it. So yeah, it fit, and luckily they chose to pull it out like it was their idea. And they said, "How about we begin at the end?" I thought, yeah, I've got them this time.
I'm going to ask a question, sort of both of you, and then Linda will get to you. But I'm very interested in the editing process, and Amy, you know, how that works between the two of you. And I have heard dialogue between editors and writers before, but you know, how much, I know you have a lot of impact, but can you sort of describe how that process works between the two of you?
Yeah, sure. I kind of pulled a fast one on Chris because I think when I first bought the book, I said it's pretty much perfect. There's really not much you have to do.
And then the real work began.
Yeah. So usually what happens is when we get something on submissions, you know, I'm getting it as the time as other people are getting it, and you're all trying to read it quickly and buy it before someone else buys it. So you read it really quickly. And then usually what will happen is then I'll read it again. Once I own it, I'll read it slowly. And so when I would first talk to Chris, I might give him what we would say is a structural edit, where I would say, you know, I really like this, but I think in this case, Chris, without giving something away, I had figured one thing out, which you didn't want me figuring out till later. So I said, you know, that's my only issue is I think that people could figure out this, and I think we want to have that later on. But then what happened was once we were working together, I read the manuscript slowly, and then there were all these other things that crept up. And now we might have had that happen, like I think through like maybe 3 more rounds.
At least.
Because you know, it's interesting without giving stuff away. You know, there's one thing which frankly, I don't think either one of us caught until the very end, where all of a sudden we're like, oh, there's no way this, like the timing didn't work, right? So So usually what will happen is I'll send back to the author, I'll do a structural edit, which will say, love this character could be more fleshed out. I think this chapter doesn't necessarily work, and then you also send them a line edit, which will be, where you'll changing words, or you're saying this reads awkwardly, things of that sort. And then Chris, usually what will happen is we'll probably talk on the phone, because he'll just say like, this is all fine, I don't really understand this, or I don't agree with this. He does a revision, sends it back, and we sort of go back and forth until we feel like we're done. In the ideal world, you go back and forth until the author is just like, you have the exact book you want. Sometimes though, you just get to the point where you realize like, I've pushed the author as far as I'm going to be able to push them. And we're not going to get there. And what was interesting is that with Chris was totally game for like, he's like, let's keep doing this until it's perfect, which I really feel like we got there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was it's such a different book as well. The book that you read now is not the book that Amy received. It was I didn't really want it published, and I wasn't happy with it, and I became one of those difficult authors in the UK. I don't know if it was because it was so personal or because I'd spent so long with it. It just didn't feel right. And then a couple of years with Amy, and I had the book that I dreamed it could be. It was the book. It became the book that I wanted it to be, and I knew that after the first phone call with Amy, because she picked up some stuff, that had been bothering me, that I was too close to the story to see, that I just didn't get, and I'm so glad, because it was a different book.
And I should give credit, because also then I had a junior editor working with me. So after Chris and I went through it, I then had Connor, who's my associate editor. He went through it, and he had actually gone to law school. So he ended up picking up some stuff that actually neither Chris or I would have picked up on. So, but again, like I couldn't be more like I don't know if I had ever actually dreamed it was going to be as good as we got it to, because Chris really sort of, we didn't buy this envisioning Chris was going to do like a massive amount of work on it. And I should say he didn't do massive amounts of work, but in a way it's almost harder doing the sort of small stuff than sort of all like, and if I just said, well, you need to just like change the ending completely, like it was all there, but it was like, instead of taking, it was like taking like, it was sort of doing like it's like a scalpel rather than like a hatchet.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it sounds like a true partnership, which is probably your dream author and dream editor position. And I won't go on and on about how much I think it is also perfect. Linda, you're up. You need to unmute yourself.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, thank you, Chris. This was a wonderful book, and I totally agree with Terry that, and what everyone else has been saying. It's one of my favorite books this year, and thank you for being here. And I have a question. I know that I loved all the characters, and the plot was very intricate and complex, but I have a question. Maybe I missed something because I did read it fairly quickly, but there's a plot question that I wish you could clear up. Okay, at the end when Walk goes into Dark's storage locker and he finds the tape of the arson showing Duchess committing the arson, I thought she threw it in a trash can, some random trash can. How did it, and Dark spends the whole book looking for that tape to present to the insurance company, whatever. I mean, did Walk find another copy? I mean, what was going on there?
Okay, so I know the bit you're talking about, and there's a character called Dee Lane that rents a property from Dark, and she's clearing out her stuff, and Dark offers to store it for her. So Duchess is.
Oh, so she put it in Dee Lane's. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. That was something when I was reading it really quickly, I missed that. But anyway. So that was great. Thank you.
Thank you for your lovely comment.
Thank you. Steph, your question. We can't hear you. Do you want to make sure your mic is on?
Can you type it?
Okay, I think we will wait till she types it in chat and we'll read it there. Is that okay? Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have a question? Okay, I'm up. So Chris, I've never before, I don't think, read a book with basically 3 endings, each of which I completely sobbed at the end. So I commend you for that. And I don't know if you want to talk about that at all, either one of you.
About how we got there, or yeah. So I'll talk about Duchess's ending, because I kind of mentioned it before, that her mother taught her about this selfless act. So I knew what was coming throughout the book. I think she needed that, she doesn't feel like she's a good person, throughout the story. She makes constant references to that, that she's not someone to be proud of. And she finds her way at the end, she finds the perfect selfless act, and she gives another character a chance. And I needed her to kind of find in a way it's redemption for her. She's only 13 and she shouldn't feel like that, but she does. And I don't think she has anything to feel bad about, but she does. And I knew it was coming, and I also knew it was going to be tough for people to read. And I there's so many messages that come, people needing to know what happens next, and people just finding it hard to read, and I take that as a positive, because it means that they care. So that's what we go for.
Totally. Well, thank you for that. Kathy, you're up. And you need to press the unmute button so we can hear you.
I'm using it unmuted again. Okay. I just was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your wife's support of you as a writer, because you obviously didn't like just immediately hit the ground running, but so I just wonder if you could talk about that, and just that support to get you to where you are now.
Yeah, so it's been, I think, she didn't know any of this story really until very late. She didn't know what had happened to me. She didn't know about the money and things like that. And she knew I'd been mugged because she'd seen the scars, but I didn't. I just said it was nothing. And I think that night when I quit my job and told her I wanted to write a book, she kind of relaxed a bit. It was like, I didn't tell her the full story, but I just said, I'm not happy. I really need to make a change. And she seemed relieved kind of that I confided in her. And then, from then on, she's just been amazing. She's just as supportive as she could possibly be, and it was tough. We changed our lives completely. We were comfortable, and I was heading, I was deep into a career in finance. I paid the debt back. We had kind of secured our future. We would have been fine. And then I did this kind of reckless thing, and changed everything. We have no pension, stuff like that. I end up working. I still trade in the stock market now. So I get up and trade, and then I write. Then I go and work a shift at the library. An 8-hour shift. Then I come home and do PR stuff, and that's 7 days a week. So I don't support her as much as I should, with the kids and things like that. And she picks up the slack, but it only really hit home because I wrote Tall Oaks, and we came back to London, and Tall Oaks got nominated for an award over here, which is a dagger, which is like your Edgar Awards. It's the same sort of thing for mystery. And we went to that award ceremony. And it was like this fancy black tie thing, and there were New York Times bestsellers there and things. So we were we were like just sitting in the corner alone, me and that. And I didn't write a speech or anything because I knew I wouldn't win. And then they flashed up the book on the screen, on this big screen. So I thought, oh crap, I've won, you know. So I went up and messed the speech up, forgot to thank everyone. And then it was when we got back to the hotel room that she just burst into tears. And that was the first time that I realized, you know, it kind of, I knew, but it really hit home how tough it had been, you know, to kind of live this life alongside me. And I'm not someone that ever talks about how I feel. You know, you would never guess that from this therapy session that I've entered into. But I don't, you know, if I'm struggling, I just get on with it, and I don't ask for help. And so she's constantly asking if I'm okay. But yeah, she's amazing, basically, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, Steph believes she's going to pull it off this time.
Okay, sorry. I feel like my kids, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. I feel like my kids on Zoom, and they're like at school, and, you know, so sorry about the technical problem. Thank you for making time for us. I know it's like 2 a.m. where you are. And I guess my question, I lead a book group and we are reading this next. We're so excited. My question is, how on earth do you do it? You are doing the stock market. You are doing 8 hours at the library. You are a dad. How and when do you find time to write? I know you mentioned that oftentimes you write scenes that you're motivated to write. That can't be every day that you're motivated to write. So can you talk a little bit about your writing process in light of your life and your busy commitment?
Yeah, so I have this funny relationship with writing, you know, as you can probably guess from what I've said, and it's more like I need to write often, and which is a pain in the arse sometimes, because, you know, I don't feel like I want to write, but I know what happens if I don't write. You know, things get too difficult, and I kind of live in fear of slipping again, and writing keeps me grounded, so it's a good excuse, you know, I will write every day, you know, something, even if it's a paragraph, and I'll delete it again at the end of the day. And I don't sleep an awful lot. I'm terrible at sleeping. So I will just lie in bed awake, worrying about a paragraph or a sentence or an edit that Amy's given me. And unless it's the absolute best that I can possibly do, you know, I refuse to send it, you know, and I won't, because I'm so aware that people are spending their hard-earned money on it, and there's a million other books they could choose, and you know, I'm so privileged that they've chosen our book to read, so I feel like I owe them that. So I spend every spare second that I can writing, and often it's very late at night, so this isn't that bad for me. At 2 a.m. isn't that unusual. I just don't sleep much.
Okay, we're almost out of time. Margarita would like to ask one or make one quick comment, I think. Margarita, you want to unmute yourself? Yes or no?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Terry, for sharing this book with us. Thank you for being here. I just have to say that one of the most important parts of this book for me was everything. There wasn't a special part. There was one part, and this is the comment I wanted to make. There is throughout the story the impending moment for Duchess when she's going to cry. I actually highlighted each of those instances, and I was waiting for that moment. And when it came, it was such a wonderful relief, because, you know, and you answered the question I was going to have before this for the previous comment, is the reflection of how incredibly touching this book is, that the writing was with such restraint for that ultimate climax of the tears to flow. And so thank you so much for writing such an important book. I absolutely loved it, all parts of it.
That is that's so lovely to hear. Thank you very much.
Well, you know, I hate to stop, but we have come to the end of the hour. I have one housekeeping thing I need to say before I thank everyone, which is that some of you bought general admission tickets. Your general admission price is good towards the purchase of We Begin at the End. And we hope that those of you who don't have your copy yet will purchase one. And I think Hildy pasted the code in chat, and she could do that again. So that's the end of that piece. I can't thank the two of you enough. It was amazing. You couldn't hear me laughing here from my office, but I am completely charmed by you, Chris. And Amy, I am always indebted to you for all the things. And I thank you both very, very much for tonight. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you for having us, and thank you all for hopefully reading the book and for being here. This was such a treat.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. It's been fun. It really has.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Get some sleep.